Devotions with Daniella. We are reading from Daniella's book, Uncultured, about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and then going into the cult of the U.S. Army. This is Chapter 12, Coming to America. Belo Horizonte, Brazil, 2001. I couldn't believe it. We were going to America. Of all the places to relocate, America seemed like the best possible outcome. I loved Belo Horizonte, but at nearly 14, I was eager to see more of the world. We had lived in 8 different communes in 6 different countries by then, but all I could really remember were the walled compounds in Belo and the ones scattered around Rio. I was finally old enough to recognize the pattern. We moved every couple of years when someone didn't like something, and boom, we could wind up on the other side of the world. In this case, Jesus had told Mom and Dad and the senior leaders they reported to that it was time. Of course, all the praying in the world wouldn't have changed that Auntie Hepzibah and Mom didn't get along. Conveniently, Jesus agreed. Mom had arranged for us to go to a commune in Mexico, but when that fell through, we had no choice but to go to the States, where it was easier to find somewhere to land. It would be temporary, but it would be America. So we would fit whatever possessions we'd managed to scrape together into a small suitcase, leaving behind everything else. We knew we'd never see our friends again once we said goodbye. This move was more complicated than most. Right before Mom's 29th birthday, she discovered she was pregnant yet again, the 7th baby in 14 years. We knew that ultrasounds were a trick of the devil to make women get abortions. But because we were moving across the world, my parents decided that packing would be simpler if they knew the baby's gender. They only had to convince the other commune adults, always in favor of practicality when it was more convenient, to vote in agreement, which wasn't hard. So Mom and Dad went to the hospital for what should have been a routine ultrasound. It wasn't. Our baby had spina bifida, probably advanced, my parents told us when they got back. They explained it was a birth defect in which the spinal cord fails to develop properly. No longer a death sentence like it had been in the decades before, when children would die during birth or soon after because of a gaping hole where the spinal cord should be. Our baby would probably live, but she might be paralyzed, brain damaged, incontinent, club-footed, and prone to other bad infections and illnesses. I remember the placid look on my parents' faces, not horrified at all. This was all a part of God's plan, Dad reminded us. Trust and believe. Maybe this was God's way of introducing us to the medical establishment so we could witness to them. And oh, by the way, we're having a girl. Isn't that great? My head couldn't stop spinning. Something was going to be very, very wrong with our new baby. How are we supposed to handle that? An image of clubbed feet stuck in my brain and wouldn't get out, like the cripples in old Bible movies we watched. After the diagnosis, Mom saw a lot of systemite doctors. The first one told her to get an abortion, and we were not surprised an evil systemite doctor would want us to murder our baby. Another doctor told her about a new surgery she needed immediately. Doctors could prevent the condition from worsening and maybe even correct what was already damaged. The spinal cord might get the chance to heal and develop in utero, but the surgery only had a 50% chance of survival for the baby. Choosing that surgery was almost like choosing an abortion. Jesus would never allow that either. Dad explained our faith was being tested. Did we really trust in Jesus and believe that he never made a mistake? This was clearly his plan, so why should we take it on ourselves to correct it? But I had read the diagnosis paperwork they sent home from the hospital and some of the articles Mom downloaded from the internet and had looked up the words in Auntie Hepzibah's dictionaries. Spina bifida was caused by a lack of folic acid, found in all prenatal vitamins, which I knew we didn't usually have. I concluded that my mother's body was too depleted to grow a healthy baby. I had been watching her deteriorate for years as she ballooned with each new baby. And as each pregnancy got harder and harder, as she kept looking more tired, as she kept getting sicker and more nauseous, as she kept breastfeeding whenever she wasn't pregnant, as she miscarried once and then again, late term. If I was so hungry all the time, never given enough food, how much more so was my mother, who was supposed to be eating enough to grow a life inside her? And that question led me to a bigger one. How much damage had been caused to all of us by hunger, explained by science, explained by human neglect, and not by God? I decided I needed to do something special for Mom's birthday that week. She deserved it. I wanted to help her, help my baby sister, so the girls and I came up with a plan. Every day after lunch was quiet time. The 2 hours that had been so dangerous for me when I was younger had become my salvation as an adolescent. As soon as the adults retreated to their naps, which always lasted at least an hour, Michaela began taking care of the dishes while Mary and I snuck into Dad's office. We didn't need much money, only about 10 reais. Mary was the pickpocket while I stood guard. The whole operation took less than 5 minutes before she appeared with the money and the key to the side door by the big wooden gate where Reina and I waited. All we had to do was sneak out of the commune. It wasn't our first time. We knew exactly what we wanted to get Mom, our favorite box of chocolate bonbons, a specialty in Brazil, and we could find them at the corner store a few minutes walk down the small dirt path through the overgrown field by our home. We planned to tell her we had saved the centavos 1 coin at a time while fundraising, knowing she'd be too tired to ask many questions. What mattered was how happy she would be. What mattered was how happy I would make her. We hadn't planned on the storm. The rain and bellow, always fast and ferocious, surprised us as the sky exploded, drenching every inch of our bodies. Even before raindrops pelted us, Reina said we needed to run. We had lost track of time and only had 5 minutes before Dad would expect us for Bible study. Michaela had been tasked with stalling him, but we didn't know how long that would last. Be careful with this mud puddle, Reina said as she sprinted around it, Mary hopping nimbly behind her. But it was already too late. I felt my feet slip out from under me, then jerk backward as I lost control and saw only blue sky overhead. Panic seared through me as I landed. Something was very wrong. For a moment, I flashed back to the day so many years earlier. That perfect family picnic turned into a horror when I cut my hand. In my body, but also somehow above it, I looked down and saw a leg attached to me, but twisted at a disturbing angle. My leg is broken, I said, strangely calm, the words like marshmallows in my mouth. My mind ran past the field to the house, to the study room, to the clock on the wall ticking away, to Mom's bonbons that would never be eaten, wet and muddy on the soggy ground. It's not broken, Reina encouraged. Come on, get up. But all at once the pain hit me, not just from my leg, but from everything else. Everything was broken. I tried to do one nice thing for Mom, who never got anything nice. And this is what happened. I screamed at the top of my lungs. I fucking broke my leg! A part of me retreated and watched, suspended, surprised at how easy that terrible and forbidden word came to my lips. Then it didn't stop. Every bad word I'd ever heard in Portuguese and English spewed from my lips. Reina went into family adult mode. Mary, run and get Dad. We need help. And then she picked me up, carrying me off the path and back to the main dirt road. She panted as she laid my slight 13-year-old frame in the middle of the road and sat beside me. Mary crested over the hill and Dad stumbled after her. His glasses were missing, and I'd find out later Mary had woken him from a dead sleep by ringing the giant gong at the front gate over and over again, a single minute before his alarm. Half blind, he panted and wheezed with asthma as he knelt down next to me. But in that moment, my physical pain was eclipsed with a deeper concern. He looked so angry. He took one look at me, got up, and walked off without a word. By the time he came back a few minutes later with a car, his glasses, and inhaler, and someone to drive us to the hospital, I was almost delirious from the pain. Socialized medicine is free but not easy. We sat in a waiting room for nearly 4 hours, me holding my shin in my hands, Dad pressing firmly on the brake, which, unlike when I'd gashed my hand, hadn't broken skin. I swooned in and out of consciousness. When we finally got taken in for x-rays, I was ready for some anesthesia, but no such luck. Rough hands turned me this way and that to get good images while I screamed and screamed. Not even words, pure pain. Then a doctor sat me on the edge of a table with my leg dangling free for a few more excruciating hours to let gravity pull the bones back to where they were supposed to be. A nurse wrapped plaster-soaked gauze from my toes to my hip, locking my leg into place. As we left the hospital, they mentioned it might not be enough, that it might need surgery and a pin. Like Mom's baby, we'd have to wait and see. When I finally made it to a bed, I knew one thing. I'd never been in so much pain for so long. No one thought to ask for any painkillers at the hospital, and nobody had any to give me. I lay there while everyone in the commune trekked through to visit, anointed me with olive oil, laid hands on me, and prayed in tongues. And then the girls all signed my cast with colorful markers. Someone brought me a box of chocolates, the same kind we'd bought for Mom, which I assumed was still laying somewhere in the mud. For 3 days, I couldn't leave my bed and used a bucket instead of the toilet. Sleepless and delusional, I passed the time clicking the bones of my shin back and forth across each other. I was in so much pain I couldn't pronounce words properly. By the third night, my toes were so swollen it was obvious we needed to return to the hospital. Doctors cut the cast, re-broke and reset my leg, and, as on discharge, told me not to move for at least a week while it healed. Once again, nobody mentioned anesthesia or painkillers. I kept screaming and cursing, but at least it was mostly in English, so the doctors and nurses hopefully didn't know what I was saying. It was mid-March and we were scheduled to leave for America 3 weeks later. Mom sat at my bedside after she tried to use some crystals and something she'd read about in an online article about faith healing or crystal healing or energy work. I wasn't sure. She pushed her own worries aside as she listened to mine. How could I travel internationally when I was like this? How was I supposed to help her if I couldn't help me? How? Mom told me God would show us the way. He always took care of us. I began to cry in big sobs. The sleeplessness, the pain, and the trauma broke through any mental defenses I had and unlocked the box where I kept all the hidden things that were too dangerous to think. The world was upside down, and I was in the middle of it, a raw nerve exposed. I don't believe in God, I blurted in retort, the voice coming through me as if from somewhere else, without my permission. I saw something flash behind Mom's eyes, but I couldn't place the emotion. She left the room abruptly, and I grew woozy. Maybe if I were more conscious, I would have been more scared of whatever punishment was surely coming. For lying, for sneaking out, for the damning words that had escaped my lips. I knew I was crying. I knew my body was shaking from sobs, but I was floating above it all, watching that miserable girl who looked like me, lying broken and alone on the bed. There was only room for one kind of pain. Mom returned with a bottle of wine and 2 plastic cups. She filled one to the brim and poured a little into the other, then handed the full one to me. I screwed up my nose. I hated wine. She sat down on the bed next to me, careful not to disturb the pillow propping up my cast. I don't have any medicine to give you, she said, and this won't take away all the pain, but it will help you sleep. I promise, baby girl. She slipped slowly while encouraging me to down not 1, but 2 full glasses of the cheap red wine. It burned my throat, but my body warmed quickly, and soon the fuzziness in my head began to feel less like despair and more like oblivion. As I dreamed, I saw the visions of America I'd been given to work with, the land of white sugar and soda and toxic systemite rock music. I imagined Amish kids riding through the streets on buggies and teenaged Mormon girls in their calf-length full skirts flitting around a beautiful school campus. I dreamed of log cabins with snow and acres of land, with giant families all living together the way we'd seen in the old musical 7 Brides for 7 Brothers. I also saw the churches where Americans sat in ignorance, worshiping false idols, unaware that God had already sent to them his prophet and, like the Jews of old, they had rejected him. I saw hopeless teenagers high on drugs and despair, searching for Christ, but only finding minimum wage work at McDonald's and a life of constant struggles in the system. Then I saw a surgeon, dressed in flawless white, surrounded by shining chrome. A surgeon in America could fix my leg, I'd heard a doctor tell my dad. Maybe in America they'd give me medicine or fix it the right way. Maybe in America they'd do things right. Landing in America was nothing like what I had pictured. After a long flight with a pregnant mother, 5 children under 12, and a teenager with a cast up to her hip, trying to fit onto a standard airplane seat, we were all exhausted and annoyed, but also curious to see the evil country of our origin. The only one of us who remembered America was Dad, since Mom had left at the age of 2 and never returned. None of us kids had ever been to our home country before. We stepped off the plane at LAX, and the noise immediately assaulted my ears. America was so loud. The cities of Brazil weren't quiet either, but there was a warmth and friendliness there that seemed to soften the edges of the sounds. And I had been able to tune out a lot of chatter because it was usually in Portuguese. But almost every conversation around me was in English, and I felt like they were all going straight to my brain. All the voices bumping around at full volume inside my skull. Everyone around us seemed like they were in such a hurry. I didn't remember any of the other countries I'd been in being even this close to overwhelming, not by a long shot. As we moved through the terminal, someone pushing me in a thin metal wheelchair with several bags on my lap, I caught glances of the world outside. Bright and bold desert sun illuminating palm trees and large swaths of concrete. It was shocking to see English everywhere. I couldn't help but read every word of every sign and label I saw. I had only ever lived in countries where everyone else spoke a different language than us. English had only ever been ours, the family's. It had never occurred to me how strange and isolating this was. To be separated from our neighbors, not only by our 10-foot concrete walls, but by the very way we communicated. And here I was, in a place where I suddenly had so much in common with these strangers I'd been taught my whole life to hate. Grandpa had said America was rich, and that certainly looked true as we exited the terminal. Shiny new cars sped past without peeling paint or rusted metal, and most still had their bumpers. Everyone I saw, even the kids, was dressed in stylish and impeccably clean clothes that fit them well. I would eventually make my peace with the way English assaulted my ears, but it took much longer for me to get used to the huge houses, how anyone could walk right up to the door of a 5-bedroom mansion and ring the bell. No giant gates, no concrete walls, no guys in camo standing outside the fanciest ones with automatic rifles. What did rich Americans do with their glass bottles if they didn't break them into jagged pieces and glue them to the tops of walls to stop thieves from climbing over? The lack of walls, it turned out, would change everything in our lives. It was also probably one of the main reasons there weren't more Children of God communes in the U.S. The suburbs of America can't hide compounds filled with 100 people, half of whom should have been in school. Grown women walking around half naked, quoting the Word of God and Moses David, or uncles doling out punishments. We moved into a 3-bedroom apartment in San Diego that we would share with another family. The new family had 5 sons still at home, so we were 18 people total, crammed into 1,000 square feet with an RV as overflow, and it felt even more crowded than my childhood days of sleeping in triple bunks. As a result, and out of necessity, we spent more time in public than I ever had in my life. I sat beside the swimming pool at the apartment complex, the sun on my face and leg cast, while Mary played with the youngest of the teenage boys, Isaac and Angelo. I hiked about on crutches in the California mountains and explored the RV park next to our apartment building with our dusty and unsupervised group of teenagers. Despite living amongst systemites, we still weren't allowed to fellowship with them. So there were a lot of Children of God gatherings with other households. We even had an organized youth group with monthly picnics, ball games, and pool parties. It was one of the first times in my life that I experienced adults planning something special for teens and children for the sole purpose of wanting us to enjoy ourselves, with hardly any religious programming involved. Because we had to hide that we weren't in school, they couldn't make us spend our days on the streets begging for change or passing out pamphlets about the rapture and apocalypse with half-naked angels on the front. From what they told us when we asked them if they wanted to ask Jesus into their hearts, Americans seemed like they were all Christians anyway, though I'd been trained to expect they were sheep in wolves' clothing. And there were boys. In Bello, there had been 6 teenage girls in the commune, but we hadn't lived with boys our age for years. Raina, Jamie, and I had interacted with enough systemite teens when we did our various missionary stuff to think that those boys were different from uncles, and very intriguing. At almost 17, Raina felt she was still a little old to be single, but moving into a house full of boys fixed that problem. She paired up happily with the oldest son pretty much the day we showed up. I had no such luck. Despite being in the land of heathens, at 14, I was still mostly undesirable. Still the weird girl with frizzy hair, glasses, and a bonus giant leg cast. Even without romance, even crowded into our tiny apartment with the constant pain of my broken shin knitting itself slowly back together, the worry about mom's pregnancy, and the general sensory overload and stress of yet another transition, especially with how much I missed the culture of Brazil, my life felt better in America. It was the closest thing I'd ever experienced to what I thought of as a normal life. I felt a knot loosen that I hadn't even known I'd been carrying inside me, even as I tried to remind myself not to get too comfortable and not to feel too safe. I knew it would only ever be temporary, and, like everything in the family, I had no idea how long this temporary would be.